UFC middleweight division has quickly become one of the most talked about weight classes in the sport, with major announcements and heated debates reshaping the path to the title. Recently, it was confirmed that Rainier de Ridder, better known as RDR, will face Anthony Hernandez at UFC Vancouver. This matchup is significant in itself, but what truly captured attention was the UFC's declaration that the winner of this bout, or the winner of the upcoming clash between Caio Borralho and Nassourdine Imavov, will earn the next crack at Khamzat Chimaev's middleweight championship. For fans, this news was explosive, but it was RDR's reaction that really turned heads. Appearing on the Pound for Pound podcast, RDR did not hold back. He bluntly stated that Caio Borralho has no business being in the title conversation at this stage. According to him, activity matters, and Borralho simply hasn't been active enough. RDR highlighted the fact that Borralho has not fought in nearly a year, while he himself is preparing for his fourth fight of 2025. That consistency, he argued, proves who is more deserving of a title opportunity. RDR went further, breaking down the situation in practical terms. If the UFC wants the next middleweight title fight to happen in Abu Dhabi, he believes he is the clear frontrunner. Caio and Imavov are fighting in 3 weeks, RDR explained, and that might be too quick of a turnaround for one of them to step up. I think Imavov is very deserving. He's skilled, has an impressive record, and what he did to Adesanya was nothing short of incredible. But Borralho, he hasn't even fought this year. His last big win was over Cannonier, which was solid, but MVP just beat him as well. Meanwhile, I've fought 5 times this year. He's just not there right now. This statement illustrates RDR's confidence in both his abilities and his place in the division. Competing 4 times in a single year is rare in today's UFC landscape, especially for fighters at the elite level. Combining that level of activity with a string of impressive victories makes his argument difficult to dismiss. Still, nothing is ever straightforward in MMA. Nassourdine Imavov has emerged as a legitimate contender following his shocking and dominant performance against Israel Adesanya. Even RDR admitted that Imavov is more than deserving, praising both his skill set and the decisiveness of his win. The same, however, cannot be said for Borralho, who continues to fight for recognition amid doubts about his recent inactivity. One thing is certain, the middleweight division has never been more exciting. Between RDR pushing for his chance, Imavov's rapid rise, and Borralho's attempt to prove himself, all roads eventually lead to Khamzat Chimaev, the undefeated champion standing tall at the top of the division. Whoever gets the call will be walking into the toughest fight of their career. Beyond the middleweight title picture, the UFC is buzzing with additional drama. From Sean Strickland's suspension and Jon Jones firing back at Daniel Cormier, to Nate Diaz throwing shade at Chimaev and Dricus du Plessis being denied a rematch, the MMA world feels more chaotic and more thrilling than ever. The stakes are rising, the rivalries are intensifying, and fans simply cannot get enough of the drama unfolding inside and outside the octagon. Moving to our second news, Nate Diaz has never been one to hold back his opinions, and now the Stockton legend has officially entered the middleweight title conversation with some stinging criticism aimed directly at Khamzat Chimaev. Following Chimaev's dominant victory over Dricus du Plessis at UFC 319, a fight that many hailed as one of the most one-sided performances in recent middleweight history, Diaz went against the grain and accused the newly crowned champion of being a scared fighter. Chimaev's win was remarkable on paper. Not only did he defeat a tough and durable contender in du Plessis, but he also secured an ultra-rare 50-44 scorecard, a feat that immediately sent shockwaves through the MMA community. For most fighters, a dominant score like that would cement their reputation as a force of nature. However, Diaz saw something entirely different. During a recent livestream appearance, the UFC veteran dismantled Chimaev's performance in typical Nate fashion, raw, blunt, and unapologetic. "I don't like that kind of fighting," Diaz said. "It's boring to me. He's supposed to be this big, scary guy, but then he's just holding him down, landing soft punches. That's not real fighting. That's the style of a scared fighter. He's scared that if he lets go and throws real shots, the other guy might escape. That's not fighting to me." For Diaz, fighting has always been about grit, risk-taking, and delivering a show for the fans. He has long criticized wrestling heavy or smothering strategies, preferring raw exchanges and stand-up wars. His remarks about Chimaev weren't just tactical, they cut deep into the perception of what it means to be a true fighter. But Diaz didn't stop there. He went further, labeling Chimaev as someone who may appear intimidating from the outside, but in his eyes looks more like a scared child when the pressure is on. It was vintage Diaz, brutally honest, polarizing, and guaranteed to stir debate, and stir debate it did. The MMA community immediately split into two camps. On one side were fans and analysts who agreed with Diaz, arguing that Chimaev could have pressed harder for a finish and instead played it safe. On the other side were those who defended Chimaev's dominance, pointing out that dismantling an elite opponent like Duplessis over 5 rounds is an extraordinary achievement. Few fighters in history have managed to secure such a lopsided score against such a tough contender. Despite Diaz's critique, the victory has brought massive rewards for Chimaev outside the cage. Perhaps the most symbolic moment came when Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov presented him with a luxurious Mercedes Maybach as a token of appreciation. In return, Chimaev gifted his championship belt to Kadyrov, a gesture that underscored the depth of their personal connection. Chimaev later revealed that years earlier, when injuries and self-doubt nearly pushed him into retirement, it was Kadyrov who convinced him to keep going, promising him that one day he would be a champion. That prophecy has now come true. Looking ahead, Chimaev is expected to defend his title later this year, with Abu Dhabi being the most likely destination. If that happens, Kadyrov will almost certainly be in attendance, watching from cageside as the fighter he once motivated now carries UFC gold. Whether one agrees with Diaz or not, his comments have once again ignited discussion in the MMA world. Some see his criticism as brutally accurate, while others dismiss it as classic Diaz trash talk. What cannot be denied, however, is that Chimaev's rise has everyone talking. From fans to fighters, the spotlight is firmly on him, and with the middleweight division more competitive than ever, the pressure on the undefeated champion has never been greater. Now moving to major headline. Sean Strickland, the outspoken and often controversial UFC middleweight, has once again found himself making headlines, this time for all the wrong reasons. Known for his fiery personality and unpredictable behavior, Strickland has been suspended for 6 months following a heated altercation that took place at a Tough Enough regional event in June. On that night, Strickland wasn't scheduled to fight. Instead, he was cornering one of his teammates. Unfortunately for Strickland and his team, his fighter lost, and emotions inside the venue were already running high. Rather than ending the bout with mutual respect, the victorious fighter began taunting and verbally attacking not just the defeated opponent, but also Strickland and Chris Curtis, who were standing nearby in the corner. For those familiar with Strickland, it came as no surprise that he did not simply let the insult slide. Known for his intensity and short fuse, Strickland reacted in the heat of the moment. Instead of just firing words back, he crossed the line. Strickland stormed into the cage and began throwing punches, escalating the situation from verbal sparring to full-blown chaos. Security personnel rushed in as officials tried to restore order, but by then the damage was done. What was meant to be a local fight night turned into a viral moment of mayhem. Once video footage of the incident began circulating, the Nevada State Athletic Commission quickly stepped in. As first reported by journalist Nolan King, the NSA handed Strickland a 6-month suspension, making it clear that his actions violated the standards expected of licensed athletes. Entering the cage and throwing punches while not an active competitor is considered a serious breach of conduct. However, the commission left the door open for a slightly reduced punishment. If Strickland agrees to complete an anger management course, his suspension could be shortened to 4.5 months. Along with the suspension, he was fined $5,000 plus legal fees. His teammate and fellow UFC fighter Chris Curtis, who was also involved in the fracas, was not spared either. He received a $2,500 fine and additional legal costs. The decision has sparked heated debate among MMA fans. Some argue that the punishment is too harsh, claiming that Strickland was simply being himself, raw, passionate, and unapologetically authentic. They see his emotional intensity as part of what makes him one of the most entertaining and polarizing fighters on the roster. On the other hand, critics have praised the commission's firm stance, pointing out that UFC athletes are global representatives of the sport and must uphold a higher level of professionalism. For them, jumping into the cage after a fight has ended and initiating violence is a line that cannot be crossed under any circumstances. For Strickland, the suspension is undoubtedly a setback, both professionally and financially. Yet, as his career has shown time and time again, he has a way of bouncing back into the spotlight. Love him or hate him, Strickland has proven that he keeps the MMA world buzzing. Fans will now be watching closely to see how he responds once his suspension ends, and whether this incident will serve as a turning point in controlling his fiery temperament or simply add another chapter to his unpredictable career. Another piece of news, one of the most storied rivalries in mixed martial arts history has flared up once again. Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier, two men whose careers have been forever linked, are back in the headlines after a fresh exchange of words reignited their long-standing feud. This latest spark began when Daniel Cormier sat down for an interview with Shannon Sharpe, where the discussion turned to one of MMA's favorite debates: who belongs on the sport's all-time Mount Rushmore? As expected, Jon Jones's name came up quickly. His record-breaking career and dominance inside the octagon make him an undeniable candidate in the eyes of many. But for Cormier, things were not so simple. Cormier made it clear that he could not include Jones or even Anderson Silva on his Mount Rushmore list. His reasoning came down to one major issue: both fighters had failed performance-enhancing drug tests during their careers. For Cormier, that was an automatic disqualification. The integrity of competition is everything, he explained. If those controversies didn't exist, both men would absolutely deserve a spot. But because of those failed tests, I just can't put them there. Instead, Cormier listed Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, Georges St-Pierre, and Khabib Nurmagomedov as 3 of his locks. He praised Johnson's dominance in the flyweight division, St-Pierre's ability to remain clean and consistent during an era riddled with steroid scandals, and Khabib's unparalleled undefeated career. When it came to the 4th slot, however, Cormier admitted it was one of the toughest choices of his career. He refused to include himself, insisting that his Mount Rushmore should not be self-serving, but he stood firm that Jones and Silva were not options. Naturally, Jon Jones did not let those comments go unanswered. Taking to social media, Jones fired back on X, saying, "When DC tells his story, somehow I'm always the co-star. Thanks Shannon Sharpe for the invite. Even if I was only there in spirit." Jones implied that Cormier continued to use his name as a way to elevate his own narrative and keep their rivalry alive. The exchange didn't stop there. When a fan attempted to defend Cormier by claiming that he was actually giving Jones credit, Jones shot back. "To have a man out there lobbying on one of the biggest podcasts trying to convince the world that my work ethic was powered by steroids, you clearly didn't even watch the interview." From there, Jones laid out his resume as proof of his greatness, listing his decorated career achievements: high school state champion, youngest UFC champion in history, and widely regarded by many as the greatest fighter to ever compete in MMA. He called it a lifetime of loss, victories, and sacrifice that could not be dismissed as the result of performance enhancers. To him, Cormier's refusal to acknowledge his natural talent was both insulting and laughable. Even when fans tried to take shots at him, Jones remained defiant. One fan commented that losing is better than running away in MMA, clearly referencing Jones's past controversies. Jones responded mockingly, "Lol, the delusion some of you fans have is hysterical. You're sitting there telling me how the MMA world works. Really think about that for a second." And just like that, the rivalry between Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier was reignited once more, years removed from their 2 unforgettable battles inside the octagon. The animosity between them refuses to fade. For fight fans, this latest chapter is a reminder that some rivalries in combat sports never truly die. Whether it's inside the cage or on social media, Jones and Cormier continue to push each other's buttons, and the MMA world is once again watching closely. And finally, after Dricus Du Plessis' recent clash with Khamzat Chimaev, 2 respected voices in the MMA world, Rampage Jackson and former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, offered brutally honest assessments of Du Plessis' performance. Neither veteran minced words, and both agreed that there was no justification for Du Plessis to even think about asking for an immediate rematch. For Rampage Jackson, known throughout his career for his unfiltered honesty, the verdict was straightforward: "You just got destroyed. Don't even mention a rematch." It was classic Rampage, blunt cutting, and unafraid to call things exactly as he saw them. From his perspective, the fight was so one-sided that revisiting it anytime soon would be pointless. TJ Dillashaw echoed the sentiment, though in a more analytical tone. Having competed at the elite level himself, Dillashaw pointed out that Du Plessis didn't just lose the fight, he looked completely outclassed. In his eyes, this wasn't the kind of close back-and-forth contest that leaves room for debate or redemption. Instead, it was a dismantling, the type of fight that forces a competitor to reevaluate not just their game plan, but their entire career trajectory. Dillashaw even suggested that Du Plessis might need to rethink his place in the sport altogether. He raised the possibility of a weight class change, though quickly acknowledged the dilemma. Du Plessis is far too large to move down, yet he does not appear fully prepared to handle physical monsters like Chimaev at middleweight. That leaves him in an awkward position, stuck between divisions with no clear path forward. What struck Dillashaw most wasn't simply Chimaev's dominance, but how effortless it appeared. Upon rewatching the fight, he highlighted Chimaev's relentless pace and world-class cardio, calling it next level. Dillashaw noted that from the very first seconds of the bout, Chimaev seized control and never once relinquished it. There was not a single moment where Du Plessis looked like he had the advantage or even the potential to turn the tide. Within 50 seconds, Chimaev had already secured a takedown, transitioned into a dominant position, and rendered Du Plessis nearly helpless. Dillashaw remarked that Du Plessis looked as though he had never wrestled a day in his life. The gulf in grappling ability and pressure was staggering. Chimaev didn't just win, he dismantled his opponent with such precision that it raised serious questions about Du Plessis' ability to compete at the highest level. For fans, many of whom expected a competitive war, the outcome was shocking. Instead of a back-and-forth showcase, they witnessed total domination. Chimaev didn't just prove he belonged in the division, he showcased that he operates on a completely different level compared to most of his peers. Rampage and Dillashaw were unanimous. This wasn't just another victory for Khamzat Chimaev. It was a statement, a masterclass in control, and evidence that he may already be on a level far beyond anyone currently at middleweight or welterweight. For Du Plessis, the loss leaves him with hard questions about his future, while for Chimaev, it only solidifies his reputation as one of the sport's most dangerous and unstoppable forces.